Okay, it's happening, but it's a good thing. That is what the BBC have basically said in their new in-depth article that they've written all about geoengineering. Now, for those who don't know, geoengineering is a type of climate intervention practice. This includes techniques such as stratospheric aerosol injection, marine cloud brightening, and other wacky techniques that its goal is to slow down global warming. Yes, we've reached sci-fi levels of policy and practice. I've already made a video covering the funding with regards to geoengineering projects in the UK, where tens of millions of pounds have been pumped through universities into this controversial practice. But this article released by the BBC, I couldn't resist. I had to just create this video in order to go through the article and to just tone down the gaslighting, actually, from the BBC. So let's begin, shall we? Conspiracy theories swirl about geoengineering, but could it help save the planet? Off to a good start. This was made by Simon King, who's the lead weather presenter for the BBC. And it opens with, if we can't control rising global temperatures by drastically cutting carbon emissions, could something called geoengineering be a way to cool the planet? In what is already a multi-billion-dollar industry, scientists around the world, including the UK, are researching geoengineering and ways of manipulating the climate to tackle global warming. By the way, this was a conspiracy theory for a long, long time. The idea of manipulating the weather has stemmed back all the way since the 1950s. In the UK, there's the most famous example of that of RAF rainmakers. The RAF were dropping silver iodide over Lynmouth in Devon. This experimentation was to test cloud seeding or artificial rainmaking. This then led to a flash flood, killing over 30 people, but then it was later declassified by the government. Of course, people at the time were being called conspiracy theorists, and decades later, people were still being called that with regards to weather manipulation or weather warfare, and people are still being called conspiracy theorists today, might I add. Some experts are concerned that there are too many risks associated with it, fearing it could mess with global weather patterns or actually warm some regions, not cool them. So this practice has been done in South Africa, which has proven to be actually very dangerous, of chucking chemicals into the atmosphere to manipulate the weather. The recent case in Dubai, where the United Arab Emirates have their own cloud seeding program. There are also bots online trying to say that cloud seeding isn't geoengineering, which it is. If you're manipulating the weather using chemicals by putting that into the atmosphere, that's climate intervention, that's geoengineering. So don't get confused. As the industry grows, so have conspiracy theories. BBC Weather has seen a large increase in social media comments around geoengineering since January, accusing us of covering up secret projects and wrongly blaming geoengineering for the cool and wet weather we've recently had. Worldwide, there have been twice as many mentions of geoengineering this year on X, formerly known as Twitter, than over the last 6 months of 2023. Now, I put through Freedom of Information requests to the Met Office and the UKRI, that's the United Kingdom's Research Initiative or Council, and the Met Office came back and said that, yes, over £100,000 or £150,000 was put forward from the government on geoengineering research and projects, but also $200,000 was donated to the Met Office from an NGO called Silver Lining. It's almost like they're taking the mick with that name. This NGO, its director, Kelly Wanzer, has already said that they don't have enough information and that they acknowledge that this is a massive risk and a danger, but they still go ahead with it anyway. Bill Gates has also been obsessed with the idea of, quote, blocking out the sun using chalk or other types of chemicals. And Bill Gates has also funded research and projects all around the world, not just in America, but across Europe and various other places that are willing to research and get involved in this type of nefarious, I would call it, practices.
Meanwhile, Bill Gates is backing the first high-altitude experiment of one radical climate change solution, creating a massive chemical cloud that could cool the Earth. It's called solar geoengineering, and it's highly controversial. It would look something like this. Thousands of planes would fly very high and use nozzles to inject millions of tons of light-reflecting particles into the stratosphere. It would create a thin chemical cloud of those particles around the whole planet, blocking some sunlight from reaching the surface. It would mimic a giant volcanic eruption, which we know cools the Earth.
The BBC hasn't exactly been transparent, especially when it comes to other subjects. Take COVID, for example. Take the mRNA, for example. They haven't exactly been transparent over that. I mean, they literally created a documentary called Unvaccinated, to which they belittled anyone who decided not to take the jab.
I just don't think it's enough to say it's happening a lot without the evidence for it. I'm actually not trying to change your mind, weirdly. I'm not trying to persuade you of anything.
Yes, you are. So how can you blame people when the BBC hasn't even been transparent or honest since the start? We need to start to think about other things that we can do in order to limit any further warming, says Professor Liz Bentley, Chief Executive of the Royal Meteorological Society. That's where geoengineering starts to become an interesting discussion. It sounds like stuff of science fiction, but the idea of reflecting solar radiation, the technical term for sunlight, is not as crazy as it might sound, and sometimes happens in the natural world. During volcanic eruptions, huge amounts of ash and aerosols, or tiny particles, can be transported into the high atmosphere, which can then reflect solar radiation back into space. So, could we really replicate a volcano to cool our planet? Yeah, there's a lot of detrimental risk to that, because when a volcano goes off, you don't want to be standing anywhere near it when that goes off. A lot of health hazards. So to deploy millions of tons of sulfur dioxide, that's the chemical that they would use to inject into the atmosphere, to me, that doesn't sound like a good health benefit. Does anyone remember acid rain from the 1980s? Acid rain can be formed by natural causes, such as volcanic eruptions. And so when you purposely pump sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere and release that into the air, a chemical reaction can occur which causes acid rain. Marine cloud brightening involves spraying very fine salt water from a boat towards low-level clouds above the ocean to enhance their brightness and reflectivity. In San Francisco earlier this year, as reported by Smithsonian Magazine, a secretive experiment released salt crystals over San Francisco Bay and have asked, could it help curb global warming? It's just laughable. Another by Scientific American reads, geoengineering test quietly launches salt crystals into the atmosphere. A solar geoengineering experiment in San Francisco could lead to brighter clouds that reflect sunlight. The risks are numerous. The experiment, which organisers didn't widely announce to avoid public backlash, marks the acceleration of contentious field of research known as solar radiation modification. The concept involves shooting substances such as aerosols into the sky to reflect sunlight away from the Earth. But no. It's a conspiracy theory, of course. Modelling has shown that if you were to spray a large area, around 4% of the ocean, near the equator and brighten clouds, the combination of more cloud and consequently a lower sea surface temperature beneath it could have worldwide impacts. Looking at journals and of course scientific data that was provided to me by the Met Office, which includes the impacts of stratospheric aerosol geoengineering on Caribbean coral reefs, it consistently warns about health risks, implementation uncertainties, and ecological impacts, including unpredictable climate responses with potential risks to ecosystems, agriculture, and water resources. And that's just as a whole. Now, the BBC, the Met Office, and the UKRI are very clever because they use the term modelling or climate models, meaning there's no physical experimentation. But in order for these climate models to work, you need data. You need physical experimentation for it to model off of. There are also risks with stratospheric aerosol injection. In a study earlier this year, computer modelling found that stratospheric aerosol injection could cause stronger warming 15 kilometers above the tropics, which would change large-scale weather patterns, warming the polar regions and altering rainfall patterns over land. The computer modelling needs to be based off of physical data, meaning that obviously they've already done physical experimentation. This hasn't stopped one company in the US from starting to sell cooling credits, and for a fee they will send a balloon filled with sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, where it will burst and release the gas. This same experimentation has been done here in the UK, and believe it or not, it's called Satan. Posted by MIT Technology Review, researchers launched a solar geoengineering test flight in the UK last fall, and this was in March 2023. Last September, researchers in the UK launched a high-altitude weather balloon that released a few hundred grams of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere. But that's just what they're telling us, right? And conveniently, this article decides not to use the UK example of this. Fascinating. This brings us to fundamental questions about the credibility and risks involved in this kind of intervention. In 2022, hundreds of scientists signed an open letter calling for a global non-use agreement on solar radiation management. And good, as they should. They quite clearly see the risks, and we've seen the risks all the way back since the 1950s, maybe even before that. They said increasing calls for development provided cause for concern with the dangers involved, poorly understood, and something that would act as a disincentive to governments, businesses, and societies from decarbonising. And here we go. Additionally, some say that misinformation and conspiracists are preventing them from doing research. Dr. Ramit Debnath, an assistant professor at University of Cambridge, says that, quote, "A lot of funders are very skeptical of funding research because they are wary of being targeted by conspiracists." He has analysed almost 2 million tweets with the hashtag geoengineering and found that over 70% expressed negative sentiments about solar radiation management, with the majority tapping into conspiracies. Of course, turning their noses up at people who are concerned about dropping chemicals into the atmosphere. I mean, make it make sense, really. And where's the 30%? Who's the 30% that are showing positives? Where are they? One of these is to do with, quote, chemtrails, a widely debunked conspiracy theory about an alleged secret plot to spray people with dangerous chemicals, also suggesting the white streaks in the sky that come out of the back of planes is evidence of this. There is so much sneering from the BBC, the media class, the establishment, and of course people who parrot their talking points, to sneer at people who just are asking questions about what is going on with the weather pattern, and of course what they're seeing with their own eyes in what's happening in the sky. There's too much evidence to suggest that something weird is going on, and the fact that the BBC, I mean, it's typical, of course, that the media class and everyone else are continuing to sneer at people for simply asking questions. Dr. Debnath says that by so much as talking about solar radiation management on social media, he's accused of, quote, trying to kill people and control people's lives. The thing is, though, people don't take kindly as to shoving chemicals up into the atmosphere over their houses or in regions near populated areas, because if you don't have enough information to suggest that it's safe, people are going to come to that conclusion, aren't they? Solar radiation management is being treated with caution. The UK government hasn't deployed the techniques and has, quote, no plans to do so. However, they are investing. Okay, so they're not planning to do so, but we're going to invest in it. We're going to invest in the research. We're going to invest in governance. We're going to look at policy development and frameworks and regulation. But no, we don't have any plans to deploy it. The Natural Environment Research Council has invited applications for a £10.5 million fund in order to deliver risk-to-risk analysis to assess whether the negative impacts of the technique are greater than the damage that would be caused by climate change. Listen, all I'm going to say is keep questioning, because quite clearly if the BBC are running in-depth articles, and I'm sure Mariana Spring over at BBC Verify will either watch this or continue to sneer at people that want to just ask questions with regards to this, I would say, dangerous and nefarious act or practice of climate intervention and geoengineering, considering the data is to the contrary of what these guys are spouting. Keep asking questions and keep challenging people who believe that this is a good thing. It's not a good thing. History has already proved this time and time again. Let's just stop playing God and trying to manipulate the weather, please.